Alright, so this is a 2014 Hyundai Elantra. I'm gonna use this B-12 chem tool to soak the piston rings. So basically, I've watched a few guys who did it and it did significantly improve their issue. In my case, I have to basically go with this option because I'm not rebuilding the engine because it doesn't make sense, like financially it doesn't make any sense to open up this engine and rebuild it, even though it only has 100,000 miles. So I did deal with the clogged catalytic converter, so I know 100% that this car burns oil, and in my case basically one quart of oil every 400 miles or so. That's a lot. So basically before I get to oil change, I'm basically replacing the entire basically oil. So you can see the spark plugs that I removed all had basically threads were full of oil, and I basically used endoscope or whatever the tool is called to get into the basically to look at the pistons, like how they look, how does it look inside of the cylinder. There's a lot of carbon built up, but this is like cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3. You can see how it looks currently. I don't see like actual oil in there, but you can see, I mean, I'm not sure how it's supposed to look at this mileage, but at first I thought that the oil was leaking through the basically spark plug ring gaskets, and I replaced the valve cover gaskets, spark plug ring gaskets. It did not help. So I'm just putting basically turning the crank so the pistons are basically in one level, so I can fill up. I'm gonna use one can initially to fill up basically every single piston. So I don't know how much it's gonna be, so I'm basically going to divide those basically this bottle into 4, and I'm just gonna fill it, and I'm gonna let it sit for basically overnight. So because I'm doing it in the middle of the night, so I'm gonna let it sit for 8 hours and then come back, take a look how it looks. So basically filled it up, and also after filling up I used basically the paper towels just to close the spark plug holes so nothing gets in there overnight, because you never know this in the garage what's happening at night with all that stuff. But I just closed it with the napkins, filled it up, and then came back next morning to realize, so actually exactly 12 hours passed by and cylinder 1 didn't basically soak fully, so half, maybe 1/3 maybe, but cylinder 2 and cylinder 3 was pretty much completely empty. So all that liquid went through the pistons, and cylinder 4 had it as well. So basically cylinder 1 and cylinder 4 had basically most of it in there. So that's why I figured that my issue, even with the spark plugs, when I removed number 1, number 2, basically number 2 and number 3, there were a lot of carbon built up on those. So I figured the leak was in those cylinders, and you can see how it looks like cylinders, how they look after basically soaking what's going on inside. I don't know, I lost track of the numbers when I was using this camera to look inside what was going on, but the dirtiest ones were basically number 3, number 4, number 2 as well. The cleanest piston was basically number 1. So also after basically realizing that 2 soaked very fast, I did turn the crank. So I did basically, I don't know how many turns, and then I decided to fill up a little bit more into number 2, number 3, but I didn't use any on number 1 and number 4 because they still had a lot of B-12 in it. So I decided to sit let it sit for another 12 hours basically. I wasn't coming back to check it every 6 hours because I didn't have time with work and stuff. And when I came back, number 1 and number 4 still had liquid. So I had to use this basically suction tool to get it out, because at this point car was sitting almost like 2 days and I didn't have time for it to let soak for like 3 days. So I decided, okay, I'll just suck it out of the cylinders, let it dry, and just basically clean up the spark plugs, put everything, and also basically use the same liquid, put it in that bottle, basically water bottle that I cut out. I let the basically spark plugs were basically 2 of them had a lot of carbon in it, so I let it soak in that same liquid, wiped it off, cleaned it, and basically came back to put everything together and start the car. So initially I had a little hard time starting the car, because after trying to start it for about, I don't know, like 10 minutes or so, I had another 4 sets of spark plugs. I decided to pull out the spark plugs and take a look at the pistons, how they look, and I realized that the spark plugs were full of carbon, all 4 of them basically, and I decided to use other set of 4, and eventually the car started. So these are how the pistons were looking before I even started the car. Okay, so I let it, of course I used that suction tool, I let it basically dry, and when I started the car, yeah, I had to swap out the spark plugs. It did start well. Well, about 15 minutes I tried to start it because I didn't want to kill the battery as well, so I was taking it easy. And after starting the car, a lot of people mentioned that you would see a lot of white smoke. I didn't see that. It didn't smoke as much in my case. And maybe because that same night I took it for a ride on a freeway, I didn't see it because, well, I was doing it at night. So maybe smoke came out when I was on a freeway when I took this car for about 15-mile drive round trip. And next day I was getting an oil change, so I decided to get an oil change. Since this car gets 5W20, I decided to get 30, so a little bit thicker oil. And typically when I run my car, exhaust, like if car idles in the same spot for about 5 minutes, on the ground you would see the oil coming out of the exhaust. So I'm like, okay, maybe like first initially I'm like, maybe it's working, maybe it's not, because the way it was running a little bit rough. And after that first round trip, when I got home after first 15 miles, yeah, it did throw some coats. I'm gonna touch them here. I did clean those coats and they never appeared again after basically getting a oil change. Car runs just fine. And after driving for about 100 miles or so, after oil change and all that stuff, I decided to pull the spark plugs to test. Do they have any oil in the threads? So I pulled all 4. They were all clean. So far, after 200 miles, no smoke. Everything is running just fine. MPG has improved, but I'm gonna update after 1,000 miles in the comment. So check the comment for final results. Thanks for watching.